Hello, welcome everyone. We are admitting people from the waiting room, so we'll give everyone a few seconds to join. And this is Sabrina Paganoni. I'm talking from the Healy and G Center for ALS and Mass General, and we are here for our weekly update. So thank you for joining. I see people are still joining from the waiting room. And I think most people have joined by now, so thank you so much. This is a part 3 of a 3-week series that we've been doing to sort of summarize where we are in terms of therapy development for ALS and the platform trial. So thank you for joining this 3-part series. And so with that, we can go to the next slide. I want to go back to the very beginning. We always get new people join these weekly webinars. And so I wanted to start from the very beginning, from day one. Why did we set up the platform trial and what's the ultimate goal of it? So let's watch this very short video together that explains what it is.
The fight against ALS, the first ever ALS platform trial, designed to accelerate the development of effective and breakthrough treatments for people with ALS. So what's different about the Healy ALS platform trial? Instead of testing just one drug, the Healy ALS platform trial evaluates multiple treatments at the same time. This means more opportunities to find groundbreaking therapies in a faster time frame. Imagine having to build a new dock every time a different ship came to port with new treatment cargo. This is how traditional trials work. In platform trials, there is one dock to receive all the cargo and connect the treatments to their final destinations.
And so this is the dock or common infrastructure that we have launched in 2020. Now we are almost 3 years into this. So if we can go to the next slide. So far, we have used the same dock or the same house, which has strong foundations, to have a shared infrastructure to test multiple drugs. And so we continue to grow. So if you can click a few times, you'll see that we really continue to grow despite the pandemic, continue to grow to now, 2023. We are enrolling for regimens F and G. If you can click one more time, this means that we're using the same protocol, the same infrastructure with a single governance system that's always sort of active and open to test multiple drugs. So we're testing multiple drugs at the same time. So far, we have included 7. We're operating over a network of 70 sites across the US. And so far, we have enrolled over 1,000 participants. So really a large-scale initiative, really aimed at increasing the efficiency and the speed of drug development in ALS. Next slide. So let me tell you more about the drugs that have been included so far. This is just a brief summary, and then I want to share more about the drugs that we are enrolling for right now. So first of all, what is this? This is a graph that shows some of the mechanisms that are thought to cause ALS. The graph is meant to represent a motor neuron or a nerve cell. That's the cell that's mostly affected in ALS. And when the cell works well, people can move freely. When the cell is damaged to some extent, then weakness starts. And so this happens in the brain and spinal cord. And multiple mechanisms cause the nerve cells or the motor neurons to have problems. And so we don't know which mechanism is the most important. We think, in fact, that in any individual with ALS, there may be more than one mechanism at play. Obviously, for people who have familial ALS or have a genetically determined case, obviously that particular gene will be important. But for even for those that have an initial trigger in a genetic mutation, but certainly for everyone else who doesn't have the genetic trigger, we know that a number of the processes that are outlined on the slide are actually implicated and all kind of converge to cause ALS. So if we can keep clicking, you'll see that, you know, we'll highlight the first few drugs that we have enrolled in the platform trial. As you can see, as we moved from the first regimen to the most recent regimens, we have been targeting different parts of the functioning of the motor neurons. And that's because, again, we want to tackle ALS from different angles so that we can hopefully learn which of these mechanisms is most important. As we do so, we can also sort of screen out or check off mechanisms that don't seem to work. So, for example, the first two drugs, zilucoplan and verdiperstat, had a no-go or negative result. And so we know that targeting the complement or the myeloperoxidase system at this stage is not probably a viable option to treat ALS. And then, you know, by looking systematically at each mechanism, we can then essentially sort of downgrade, so to speak, or elevate, on the other hand, the ones that are most important, so that we know how to better target kind of drug development moving forward. Right now, we're still waiting for the results for Regimen E, Trialos, that's the pink one, working on autophagy, and the two drugs that we are enrolling for, F and G, are both targeting the same mechanism called the integrated stress response. Next slide. So far, basically, as I said, we have included 7 drugs with different mechanisms of action. The first 2 received a no-go decision. So we know that those mechanisms probably are not prominent. They may have a role in ALS, but they may not be as prominent and certainly not as helpful in terms of therapeutic intervention. Regimens C and D had some positive signals, so much so that the companies now are considering and planning a phase 3 trial. Oftentimes what happens when you do the first trial of a certain drug in a disease population, so this was actually the first time that, you know, those 2 drugs were tested on a large scale in ALS. So oftentimes you get some positive results and some negative results at the same time. And so it's important to think carefully about those. And for C and D, certainly there were enough positive signals to warrant a phase 3 trial. Regimen E, the one that we are working on right now, that we have recently concluded in terms of enrollment, we don't have the results yet. We need to follow the last participants. So if you're participating in this regimen, thank you so much. We will learn about the results of the drug by the end of the year. And then regimens F and G are enrolling now, and that's why I want to focus on these 2 regimens for the rest of the talk tonight, because those are the ones that people can enroll into if they're so if they are interested. So next slide. So Regimen F and G both have the same overall structure in terms of having a 6-month placebo-controlled period followed by an active treatment extension. They both are looking like the previous regimens as a primary endpoint at efficacy of the drug in terms of changing disease severity. So we are measuring specifically if either one of these drugs or both have an impact on the progression of the disease. And we're also including a number of other endpoints, including measures of respiratory function, muscle strength, and a number of biomarkers, which are so important because they also contribute to our understanding of ALS. Next slide. In particular, let's start with Regimen F. We had a great mechanism of action webinar, and I'll share the link to that in a second. But every time we launch a new regimen, we invite the scientists, the people who actually develop those drugs, basically come on our webinar and explain the science. So if you want kind of the long version of this, there is a whole webinar recorded. But just kind of in a nutshell, Regimen F targets the integrated stress response, which normally is not active. But when there is stress and the cells are under stress for a variety of causes, there's like activation of this integrated stress response, which is important to sort of react to stress. What happens, however, in ALS, there is persistent chronic stress. And when the system is chronically activated, it becomes essentially overpowered or overburdened. And so what the result of this is that there are toxic accumulations of proteins such as TDP-43 and other proteins that form so-called granules. Basically, they are aggregates of these proteins that when they function normally, they're good for the cell, but when they accumulate in these abnormal aggregates, they can actually cause problems within the motor neurons, which then die off. And that's why, again, we think this is a central mechanism underlying ALS. Next slide. Again, if you want to hear more about the mechanism of action of this particular drug and what studies have already been done with this particular drug, you can go to the recording that's available on our website. Next slide. We are also very excited to have begun enrollment just a few days ago for Regiment G. Regiment G is testing a different drug made by a different company, although they're also targeting a similar mechanism. And the reason, both are targeting that mechanism is because that's considered now sort of an emerging and very interesting mechanism. So certainly, each drug can do something different, but what's important is that the mechanism is a central one. In fact, a lot of recent science has really focused on this particular mechanism, which is why we're so excited to be able to test two drugs targeting this particular mechanism. We don't have a webinar with the company yet, but we're scheduling it. So I anticipate that will be available in maybe 3 or 4 weeks. We'll definitely let you know on this webinar when that's scheduled. Again, we're checking schedules and hopefully we can bring more science and more information about this particular drug to you very soon. Next slide. Now, if you have any questions about the trial, you can always contact our patient navigator team. They are a central resource for information. Catherine and Alison in particular are really always available to answer your phone calls, emails. Their contact information is on the slide. And feel free to sign up for these webinars. We have a number of other webinars, as well as the ALS link, which is our newsletter. And so that will allow you to receive information kind of right away. Next slide. I do want to end sort of this 3-part series with the most important message here is that we are incredibly grateful to everyone who's contributed to ALS research, and in particular, the trial participants or people who are supporting people with ALS participate in research such as this trial. And really, progress in ALS would not be possible without your partnership. And we started this 3-part series 3 weeks ago, describing some of the recent drug approvals that have really changed the standard of care in ALS. And many of us and many of you on the call were involved in some of those studies that directly led to the approval of new drugs over the last year or so in ALS. And now we hope to do the same. Essentially, this trial is trying to have more results like that, where we can have more results and more drugs coming to you, hopefully over the next few months. So thank you again. And now I would like to take a few questions. I see great questions already in the chat. So the first question is, how many participants can enroll in the trial at each of the 70+ sites that we have available? Well, actually, there is no cap. In other words, it's so-called competitive enrollment. What that means is that sites can enroll as many participants as they wish, as they can enroll. The only limitation is really staffing at the site. Sometimes, it's the same coordinator trying to enroll many patients or the same physician. So we're really working with sites, trying to support them in their capacity and hopefully, again, sites will be able to enroll as many patients as possible. But again, there is no cap. We're also adding new sites. I should mention that we continue to grow. When we started in 2020, we had 50 sites, but then because we want to give options to patients and really facilitate enrollment, we increased to about 70 sites, and now we're continuing to add. There's a good question about whether we are planning to initiate a platform trial in a different disease called vanishing white matter. Actually, we are not directly. I can tell you that we spoke with the Vanishing White Matter Consortium as well as with about 16 or 17 other disease-focused groups. because we were able to start the trial and really sort of develop this innovative approach, thanks to also a lot of learnings from other groups, but we were sort of the first in ALS. And we have been really contacted by a number of people in different disease areas, including the disease you're mentioning. And so we are sharing our learnings with them so that they can set up their own trials. So the question is, are regimens F and G available at the same center, and can patients choose between them? So absolutely, F and G are available at the same center. So we are now activating sites so that hopefully very soon all of the sites will have both available. Patients cannot choose which one to participate in. And again, they're both interesting drugs targeting similar mechanisms. So the platform approach essentially, a kind of a core element of it is that assignment to regimens is random, and that's because again all the drugs have essentially the same science behind them, so there's really equipoise or sort of parity in terms of scientific interest between the drugs. So there's a question about, what causes cells to have this problem with the integrated stress response. So different stressors can cause abnormal kind of activity of the integrated stress response, which then leads to accumulation of those toxic proteins that I mentioned. And we know that ALS starts probably because of different causes in different people, but whether it's a genetic mutation or other events that we don't fully understand, what we do know is that most people then converge on common mechanisms. That's what makes the integrated stress response so central. So there's a question about whether we have regulatory interactions with the FDA for different regimens. So yeah, absolutely. We have, in general, we have a very great relationship with the FDA. I have to say they've been very helpful in terms of guiding the platform trial as a whole, guiding each regimen. So we meet with the agency and really follow their advice, and we're really most grateful for their advice. There's another question that actually came in earlier about particular sites, when each site is open. And so if you want to check the activation status of the site near you, we have that available on our website. And so sites are listed either as active or recruiting. So if sites are listed as active, it means that they're part of the platform trial and they're participating in previous regimens. If they're listed as recruiting, it means that they started activation for F and or G. And so, so it's kind of a little bit different. Not sites need to come online, and we try to have them come online as quickly as possible and at the same time. But again, they come online based on contracting and staffing. So there's a few more technical questions about F and G. So again, in terms of if you have additional specific questions about F and G, I'll take them here. I also want to refer you to the specific webinar where many of the same questions were asked, and so you can hear directly from the company. And I'm sorry, we don't have the one for G yet, but we will have it very soon. So in terms of the dose strength for G, we're testing one dose. So there's only one dose that's been tested there. And in terms of differences between regimens F and G, well, there are different compounds made by different companies. And so while they target the same mechanism, that doesn't mean that they are the same. They are obviously different compounds. We must test them, each of them individually, to know more about their efficacy. There's a great question about patient advocates and whether we have a patient advocacy committee. We do, actually. We have it for both the platform trial and many other trials. If you would like to volunteer, please contact the patient navigator. We really value our patient advocates. And actually, we met with our group today for our EAP program, and we continue to meet on a regular basis for both this trial and other trials. There's a question about the different compound, masitinib. The question is whether it will be approved in Canada. Again, I'm not part of the trial in particular, so I actually don't know. I think that, when you read announcements, again, some of them have regulatory implications, some do not. I'm sorry, I don't have first-hand information on that. All right. And with this, I think we took all the questions. So thank you so much. We'll definitely be back next week and we'll give you an update on the number of sites and number of patients that are enrolled in F and G. And I'm sorry, I didn't have that available today, but we'll definitely make sure to have that next week. Thank you so much. And thank you to our assistant, Jessie, who has been so kind to always to really allow these webinars to happen. So thank you so much, Jessie, for all the technical assistance. Thank you. Bye-bye.